Greetings and welcome to the channel all about Putin and Russia and Russians, occasionally. Background: the Russian government. So this is the Kremlin, and this is kind of a highly colorized rendition of the Kremlin, but I looked through a bunch of pictures, for maybe 20 minutes, and this is like the best thing I could find. It shows an aerial view of the Kremlin. So you can see the outside, it's just a big fortress with this red brick wall, pretty tall wall, probably 2.5 stories tall. Then you have all these powder keg towers and lookout towers at the corners, and set up like a typical fortress, back in the day, or castle or whatever. They were all kind of protected the same way with an outer wall. Then on the inside, what's inside the Kremlin? Well, a bunch of churches. You can see those in the middle. There's 4 churches inside the Kremlin. They're not exactly spectacular. And the only thing I've ever seen and gone into inside the Kremlin was the armory on the bottom left. We'll take a look at some of the buildings in the next picture where I identified them. So in the background, you have this mostly yellow building, but it doesn't look like it from here because it has white, like white fortified parts that look like kind of like pillar pieces of an architecture, structural pieces of architecture. And then it has a big green dome on the top, so that's how you tell what the Senate building is. Plus, the Senate building faces Red Square, so that's Red Square in the background there, and I think I might have better pictures of Red Square, so I'll explain that in a couple minutes. And then the barracks, these are army barracks. So back when the Kremlin was built, and it was built over a period of hundreds of years, but if you had barracks for army soldiers to protect the government, a few hundred of them would do, so you don't have to put a whole division of army people inside the Kremlin. Then in the middle you have the palace, the Kremlin Grand Palace, and that's basically like the White House, the place where the president can hang out. And then on the left is the armory, and the armory is really kind of the only building I've been inside of other than the churches is the armory, and the armory is really cool. It has long hallways, and you can walk down the hallway and see all these carriages, and it's kind of interesting to see how the carriages progressed over the years, from one royal family to the next. You see the royal carriage, and they're really ornate, and naturally, they're a carriage for the royalty, so they would be ornate. But you can see how they progressed every year to where they got pretty sophisticated, and that's kind of cool. And then they have some knights in armor, and then they also have the dress styles of the ladies, and that's all under glass. But the carriages are out in the open, and then also there's a big display of Fabergé eggs in there. So there's a lot of artifacts for Russian history, and pretty expensive stuff, and jewels and stuff like that. So here's a drawing that's basically the same thing that you just looked at. Maybe it's a little easier to see. You can see the Senate building in the back with a big green dome, and then you see barracks on either side of it, and then you see the palace in the front, and then the armory. And like I said, the only thing I've been inside of other than the churches is the armory. I don't know what right like today, I don't think too many things are open for Russians to see. I doubt if the armory is even open, because Putin's probably scared to death that somebody's going to kill him. So they probably I would guess that the Kremlin is all locked up now. So here is a picture of the Senate building. You can see it's yellow, and it has all these white structural elements. So as you get further away, it kind of doesn't look as yellow or gold or whatever you want to call that. I think we would call it baby shit brown, yellow or something. And of course, the Russian flag, their red, white, and blue flag, because Russia is a democracy. And this is the inside of the Senate, which, looks like the inside of a lot of Senates. So it's, you know, typical, I guess, in a democracy, typical of a democracy, even though this is a dictatorship. And then the one building that's not inside the Kremlin is the lower house, and that's called the Duma. So that would be like the House of Representatives. And the reason is it's just, if as Russia grew and grew and grew, and so many people, so many districts, so many oblast states, or regions, and so many big cities, the House of Representatives, or the Duma, the lower house, needed to be big, so they built it outside of the Kremlin. So here you can see on the lower part, that I highlighted in yellow, that's the Kremlin. And then the Duma is the building, at the top. And you can see, looking down, the red square is going diagonally across the middle. And you can see red square there. It's outside of the Kremlin on the upper right side. And on the other side of the red square is the GUM, which is a big department store, like a Galleria, and it has all, I would imagine most of the shops are closed, because I've been in there many times, and there aren't many Russian shops in there. They're all like, Gucci, and there's all kinds of stuff. There's a Levi's store, there's an NBA store, Cartier stores, and all kinds of jewelry and stuff like that. So it's a place that I can't afford to shop in, but I've been in there many times anyway. And then at the bottom of Red Square, you see St. Basil's, which somebody put this graphic over the top of it, but that's that crazy looking church. It looks like somebody smoking crack designed. And then at the other end is the State Historical Museum. So it's also called the Western Historical Museum, like kind of Western Russia. So, and then, you have the Duma, and then up north a little bit, the original McDonald's is in the same area. It's the Bolshoi Theater is probably about right underneath where I put Duma, the sign for that. And the McDonald's would be somewhere to the left of that. Anyways, I've eaten at that McDonald's many times also, because years ago, like 20 years ago, there weren't any restaurants open late in downtown or inner city Moscow. If you wanted something to eat, you went to McDonald's. So this is the Duma from a street view. I couldn't really find a good picture of it, because they are all, there's something in the, there weren't exactly good pictures of it. There was always something in the way. So I just went into, Google, and went to Street View and took a snapshot of it. But as you can see, it's a pretty big building. It wouldn't fit inside of the Kremlin. So, and then on the left, you can see old Vladimir, the dictator himself, giving some kind of speech in the Duma. So, speech at State Duma plenary system. So that's what the Duma looks like. And here's a couple pictures of the palace. Now, the only pictures you ever see of it are in the upper left. That's actually the back of the palace, because it faces outside of the, you can see the Kremlin wall in the front there. So it's the front of it was always in the front, but then they've built a lot of buildings. Now I got this one picture of it, and you can see the picture's kind of jagged, and again, that's because I went to Street View and Google and snapped a shot of it. That's why the roof isn't straight going across the top. A lot of times Google pictures, Street View pictures are just not very high quality, but they've gated this off, so you can't really, get inside there to see the other sides of the palace anymore. So, but, the back is it's a really ornate face of the building, facade. So, and it has these big, golden clocks facing each direction. So it's a pretty elaborate building. And here's the inside of it. You can see it's pretty ornate, and looks like a presidential palace. Looks like a palace, somewhere in the Middle East or something. So, in the U.S., our stuff isn't this, with the exception of the Library of Congress, which is just as ornate as this is. Everything in the U.S., as far as the inside of the Capitol building and the inside of the White House, and it's kind of, more modern and less gaudy and less ornate. Then, this is kind of interesting. So this is on the, english.kremlin.ru. So en.kremlin.ru. And this is all about the president, the office of the president. But there's, they don't give you much history of the presidents, here. It only goes back 4 terms, and 2 of them were Putin. So 2 other guys, and they don't mention any of the older dudes that, that you'll see in a few minutes. So here, the president is elected for a 6-year term by the Russian Federation citizens. Yeah, they're elected by something, by Putin with his people with guns out there to make sure that he gets, nobody votes for anyone else. And usually Putin, kills somebody, kills the opposition, or puts them in jail or something, or tries to poison them with some kind of, high-tech, crazy poison or nuclear poison or something like that. So here's the president's authority and duties. So the president shall be the head of state and guarantor of constitutional and of civil and human rights and liberties. Okay. He shall define the basic foreign policy and be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So on the right, you can see the oath of the president of Russia. I pledge to respect and protect the rights and liberties of every citizen. But, the Russian citizens don't have any rights or liberties. They have the right to remain silent and not protest the government, or else they're going to end up in jail for 15 years. So speaking of the Duma is the body that voted on this new law in Russia that says if you spread any false information, you can be put in jail for 15 years. So false information is anything coming out of the West about what's truly going on in the Ukraine. So the Ukraine war. So, that passed 450 to 0. So shows you that people don't want to disagree with Putin, even though I don't think any of those 450 people would actually want to pass such a law. It's kind of crazy. So I pledge to respect and protect the rights and liberties of every citizen and serve the people faithfully. He's not serving the people. He's serving his self-interest. So one thing that we saw in the news lately, if you've been following the news, that, Putin and his inner circle, his oligarchs, own 85% of the Russian GDP. 85% of the GDP of a whole country is controlled by, I don't know how many, like 100 people. I'm just guessing at the number of people. All the oligarchs and the high up people in the military and whatever he considers as, his inner circle, and, whatever he pays them. So, that's kind of crazy. So serve the people faithfully. Yeah, there is a constitution in Russia, and if you followed it, the country might be pretty decent country, but Russia has never been a decent country. So here it goes back and talks about the previous presidents, and it starts with Boris Yeltsin, 1991 to 1999. There was nothing before that. Okay, so if you look at this, I'm still on the site. The government, of Russia, and then the presidents of Russia. If you just click on that, text on the top, you'll see it goes back to it starts with Boris Yeltsin, 1991 to 1999. So you can see on the right his kind of career: elected the first president of the Russian Federation in 1991. Re-elected president, then he signed a decree announcing that he was stepping down, and then he died of a heart attack in 2007. Then after him, you see a guy that you haven't heard of too much, probably, Medvedev, who was a president for after Putin and then before Putin. So he was tucked in there for 4 years and nobody ever heard of him because he wasn't allowed to do anything without Putin anyway. So this is his career on the right, elected president of the Russian Federation. Then he became the prime minister, deputy chairman of the Security Council in 2020. He's like a Putin yes man. Then there's no mention of this guy at all, the guy that broke up the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, and he's generally known as a pro-Western good guy who tried to bring Russia out of the Dark Ages and start getting along with the West. But that's on the upper right. This is a BBC screenshot that I stole from a video on YouTube. But that's the Russian flag coming down, forever, the red flag, the hammer and sickle flag. So that's all due to Mikhail Gorbachev, who was president during the breakup of the Soviet Union. And this is him today, and he doesn't sound as pro-Western as he used to sound. He's like a cranky old guy now, and he sounds very Russian. These are a couple different interviews. The one on the bottom right, he's talking about, I wanted to avoid a civil war, and that's why he stepped down as president, because he said if he didn't step down, there would have been a civil war. That's what this whole interview was about. That's from the BBC. And it would be the hardline communists versus everybody else. And he was everybody else, and he stepped down and let the hardline communists take over the country again. Should have had a civil war. And here's an old flag, an old poster, some of the more famous people from Russia. Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin. Father Lenin. So, and then Joseph Stalin. So, Russia has never had a good leader. Never, ever. They've all been dictators, It's like North Korea. It's hard to get a job as a dictator these days. You can only do it in certain countries, like, North Korea, Syria, Iran. There's only certain countries in the world that will allow a dictator. Belarus also, and there's a bunch of other countries actually that have dictators. But these guys, these Russian dudes were ruthless, and both Lenin and Stalin were known for putting hundreds of thousands of Russians in prison camps during their term, because hey, if you're going to be a dictator and you want to be extremely wealthy and you want to stay in power all your life, then you have to, kill or arrest or, everybody that opposes you. That's a good way of, making sure that you maintain your power. So this is the State Council, which is another government body in the Russian government. And you can see on the right, I blew up the bottom of this page and put it out on the right. So members of the State Council by position include the Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, the Speaker of the Federation Council of the Federation Assembly, the Speaker of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly, and the Chief of Staff of the Presidential Executive Office. So in other words, Putin's right-hand man would be in here to make sure. This is supposed to be, sometimes governments are set up to where you have, bodies that are in a natural conflict with each other, like this House and the Senate and the President. They don't all have to, sometimes they have opposing views, and then, a country is run by, majority rules, basically, sometimes. So, but he's, Putin has his right-hand man in this State Council. Then it gets even more granular as far as security goes. So this is the Security Council. So I left a picture up of the State Council because it's you can see it's a big group of people, maybe, 60, 70 people. And then on the right, you can see it gets smaller. This is the National Security. This is the Security Council. National security is a very broad term that encompasses the security of the individual, society, and the state in the face of both internal and external threats. So this would be, you know, what they do in Russia. You know, everything's an external threat to Russia because Russia's a dictatorship that's going against the world. But the internal threats, so the Security Council is who hunts down anybody who opposes the government, basically. And that's what I wrote that in red. That's not actually in Russian law. So anyone who disagrees with the dictator Putin, is who these guys are after. So that's it. That's the Russian government in a nutshell. So that's all I have. I appreciate your time.